Okay, I think we can get started. Welcome to today's webinar on what makes AI useful in publishing. Start with the architecture. Thank you, everyone, for making the time for us today. I'm Greg Chappett. I'm Director of Learning Design Innovation here at Gutenberg Technology, or GTAI, and I'll be helping to moderate the session today. But the real star of today's session is my colleague Robb Thomas, who is Director of Professional Services at GT. Robb has over 13 years experience in educational publishing, including time at Pearson Education. Robb has spent his career on both sides of this problem, inside a publisher and now outside at GT, where he helps customers optimize their content management workflows. In the last few years, that's increasingly meant advising customers on how to bring AI into those systems. So what he's sharing today comes straight out of the conversations he has every week and the things that he actually uses to solve this for customers. Before we dive in, I wanted to give a quick word about GT, or Gutenberg Technology, for anybody who is new to us. GT provides operational tools for managing the entire learning content lifecycle, from an AI native builder for quickly blueprinting or spinning up new products to an LCMS built for publishers and e-learning providers, which we'll be focusing on today, to distribution channels and readers for LMS integration and direct-to-learner provisioning. Each of our services are grounded in learning science and enabled by AI. We'll share our contact info at the end if you'd like to learn more or see a demo, but that's not what today is about. Today is intended to be a working conversation, not a presentation, although Robb will be driving. Most of the chaos our customers live with comes from the same place. Content that's spread across formats and systems that were never designed to talk to each other. So the knowledge of how a title actually fits together sits in people's heads and in spreadsheets rather than in the content itself. So the core question we're answering today is this: how do you build a content system that's actually made for AI? Specifically, we'll cover topics like why AI outputs need so much correcting, the architectural theory behind consistent AI success rates, and Robb will also be doing a couple quick demos of how GT's LCMS components, tagging, and metadata form layers both AI and humans can work from. So we'll aim to keep today's conversation to about 45 minutes, and we'll open it up for Q&A at the end for the last 10 minutes or so. If you have any questions for Robb at any time, just feel free to drop them into. There should be a question tool in Zoom, and you can put the questions in there, or you can chat me directly. You should see my name in there as well, and we'll get to all the questions at the end of the session. So, all right, Robb, why don't we get into it?
Thank you so much, Greg. This talk has sort of two parts. One is some foundational theory about opportunities. And then, as Greg mentioned, we'll jump into GT's LCMS and show how we at GT are setting ourselves up to take advantage of some of those opportunities. So I wanted to start with a very practical problem. The real problem that I see with AI content in publishing is trust. Today, almost anybody can plug an AI model into a content system and ask it to do something. We can ask AI to generate content. We can ask it to generate metadata. We can ask it to revise or transform existing content. The problem that we're seeing is that the results are inconsistent. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. They're production ready, and sometimes they create additional rounds of manual review and QA. And that consistency isn't a random artifact of AI. It's intentional. It's part of the architecture that we're plugging AI into. If we can't consistently trust the results AI gives us, then we're not really eliminating work and review cycles. We're creating a validation burden that shows up later in the workflow. So the question I want to explore today is how do we build a content architecture that gives AI enough structure to produce results we can actually trust? And the thesis I'll come back to throughout the presentation is don't make the AI model rediscover what your system already knows. If our content system already knows what something is and what it's for, how it relates to other content, and what rules apply to it, we should give that information directly to the operating AI. One response we've seen to the inconsistent AI results in the market is a move towards agents. And agents are very useful. Um, Without agents, long prompts and very large context windows create problems where models lose track of instructions or miss important details, introduce hallucinations. And by adding agents, we've divided that work and created specialized agents with targeted tasks and targeted context. But simply switching to AI agents doesn't automatically solve the trusted results or the underlying architectural problem. We can still give an agent a huge collection of requirements and documents and ask it to determine what matters. Then we've spread that original problem just across more AI calls, and ultimately at the end, we have not increased the trustability of or the trust factor of those outcomes. So thinking about some of the things that we are already asking AI agents to do, we're asking them to locate content, interpret content, compare one piece of content with another, judge whether that content is effective or appropriate for specific audiences or learners, and then synthesizing several pieces of content into something new. As those tasks become more complex, we're giving the AI more territory in which it has to interpret and guess. It has more that it needs to say, this is important, this is not important. And in those determinations, we introduce risk to the final output. So what we want to do instead is shrink that territory, and we want our architecture to tell the agent, this is the task, this is the content you're working with, these are the rules, these are the valid values that can come back, and this is what a successful result looks like. Agents that are equipped with that kind of context are much more consistent in their results, and we get much more success. So for today's discussion, I want to focus on two types of related metadata that empower giving that context to the agent. So we all know that metadata is very enabling and very important, but it's always, as metadata is content about content, it always takes a second seat to the content itself. With AI production, it doesn't have to. We can build into our processes that govern metadata can be created and applied at the same time content is created. So first, I want to talk about our content metadata. This is metadata that's attached to specific pieces of content as it exists in some kind of content management system. This metadata can tell us what the content is, what purpose it serves, what it aligns to, how it can be used, and how trustworthy the information attached to it is. The second type of metadata is specification. So this is when we get into creating new content or reviewing content against our standards and structures. It tells us how is the content supposed to be before it's created, or how is it in alignment with the standards that have been provided. So what are we creating? Why are we creating it? What's it supposed to accomplish? What standards or learning objectives should it align with? What structure should it have? What is required and what is forbidden when creating or working with that type of content? Those specifications are particularly important when AI is creating new content in a transformative way from source content perfect aligned with the mission of the new content. We don't want the AI agent to simply identify a gap and then fill that blank space in the gap with whatever seems reasonable to the model. We want it to identify the gap and then create content according to a defined specification. What does that mean? What's it look like? Let's take a look at an example. Imagining we have a page about photosynthesis. I've got at the page level some declarations made by the metadata. This is a practice page. It aligns to a particular Texas eighth grade standard. Its purpose is to reinforce material that has already been taught on instruction pages. By giving these pieces of metadata, these aren't interpretations the AI needs to make. It understands what am I looking at, why does it exist, and what is it for. They're defined metadata values in the system. So when the agent is asked, do we already have content covering this standard? It doesn't have to read the page and independently decide what each page appears to cover. It can use this declaration and say, yes, we have content that's tagged to this standard. But that's the first step. It doesn't touch that trust quotient because a tag isn't necessarily evidence that the standard is meaningfully covered or covered in the way that our requested output requires. Maybe an entire section of a book has been tagged with this standard rather than an individual page that tells us something, but not enough. Now the agent is responsible for reviewing an entire book section, and we reintroduce the risk of dropped context or misapplied standards or uh, AI interpretation of what's important within that set of content. So, in order to perform analysis, we need to go a step further. So now we zoom into that page. The page has relationship data to content blocks. So in that practice page, we might have an introduction, a case study, a reference table, and a practice activity. Each of those content blocks has its own identity, declares itself for what it is and its pedagogical purpose. The reference table declares it's a reference table and it's associated with this practice activity. The practice activity tells us that this practice activity, it contains these types of questions with these types of settings. We can go further again. The questions inside the practice activity can carry their own metadata that connects them to topics, learning objectives, psychometric values, etc., or particular standards. So now our AI has a much richer set to answer its questions. So yes, it instead of simply saying yes, it's tagged to the standard, the AI model can now say these specific questions provide evidence that the standard is covered, and those questions rely on this reference table. So in order to reuse this page, I can make the determination, or the AI can pull in the introduction and the case study, maybe if they're relevant to the output, but it definitely needs to pull in the reference table and the practice activity from this particular page. All of that is defined and understood because we have robust metadata on the content level, the page level, the section level, and the book level that tie back to that standard. At no point in this process did the AI have to actually read the page or the questions in order to be able to perform this task. So we speed up the agentic approach. We speed up the ability to pull those pieces of content in. If we have a confidence metadata piece on top of this, where we say this was all machine graded, no one has validated this. Now the AI has another set of metrics to make a determination. Should I read the page? Because this hasn't been fully validated. What's our confidence level? So let me go and, the agent can go and then read the questions and read the reference table and say, yes, this is appropriate for the task I've been assigned to create, or I need to flag this for human review because I'm still not sure that it meets the qualifications. The architecture gives us these relationships. We can create derivative products from our entire portfolio in a much faster way, assembling the pieces that are needed, identifying gaps, and making recommendations on those gaps. So a simple lookup agent or analysis agent can come back and say, this is what we have, this is what it does, and this is the depth to which it actually covers the requirement provided. As I mentioned before, we may not trust that the metadata itself was applied. AI can go through enormous quantities of content and apply metadata tags very quickly. What we've seen in some systems is, we plug in the AI, we say this all needs tagged, here are the metadata values that are there, and that's not enough in order to create useful metadata and reliable metadata, because now it's word association or cognate association between what was here and the learning objectives. It doesn't give quite the level of guidance needed to have trustful metadata. It creates what I think of as sort of metadata debt. So we can apply tags, thousands of pieces of content, nobody verifies them. It doesn't mean that we can trust it. If we have en if we had enough subject matter experts available to manually verify every tag, we would have had those subject matter experts perform the tagging in the first place. So the metadata itself needs to provide some sense of provenance. We need to know things like who or what created this metadata, when, what version of the content was it applied to, is it human or machine derived, what's our confidence level of this, and has it been since validated. So now we have content about content about content. We've got a third layer there of governance, but that governance layer is extremely important to create a system that we can trust. So we've got an audit trail of what's happened. We have ways to understand what is this and how much should we trust it? How much additional investigation should we have the AI agents do? A step beyond that is that the taxonomy needs its own set of instructions too. So it's really not enough and not efficacious enough to have the AI agent just go through a list of taxonomy values and tag it. The taxonomy values that we provide to the AI need context so that the AI is given specific instructions, again, specifications about how do these taxonomies work. So when should this value be applied? Why should it be applied? At what level should it be applied? One of the most important things in any taxonomy and applying it is we want to make sure that we're tagging the lowest appropriate denominator. So whatever the content piece is our pedagogical reusable asset. So that reference table and practice activity, both of those tagged to that standard and both of those tagged relationally is extremely important in the example we just went through. Tagging a whole section as this applies to the standard and not going any further requires additional investigation every time we need to validate that the instructions we've given are the instructions that are being followed. So I don't necessarily want the AI agent to see the word photosynthesis throughout the page and then tag every content block with the same educational standard. So what does the value declare to the rest of the system? I may want the rule to be at the lowest applicable pedagogical level, uh, practice case study may or may not get that particular tag. The reference table may or may not get that particular tag. The other blocks can have different metadata based on how they're actually used. The introduction, instead of an introduction, we may have an instruction page that tells the user how to fulfill the practice activity, how to answer the questions, and what to use. That may be a separated block in the content, but it is inseparable from the question set, or else the question set becomes inoperable to the user. The page itself can carry another level of metadata about the way that it's used and how it should be used and how it declares itself. So the instruction page that preceded the question page or the practice page may be a requirement to bring in. The practice page tells us I'm associated with this instruction page. We may not need that practice page for every product or derivative that we create, but we may need to take that instruction page and use that in the next iteration of product that we create. All of these metadata values and relationships have to tell the AI why to use them, when to use them, and most especially when not to use them. That way we don't over tag our content because, as we know, anybody who's worked with taxonomies, if everything is tagged, it's as if nothing is, and it reduces the efficacy of our search and findability later. Descriptions uh, are the easiest things for AI to create, and they're not quite the same as specifications. So when I talk about content blocks and what to do with content blocks, one of the things that we've seen is we'll create descriptions, we'll create blurbs, we'll create summaries, and the AI models themselves love to do this to create smaller summaries of larger content so that they're searching through those smaller summaries instead of the larger content. But specification takes this to a real governance and implementation level. So when we define content types, metadata fields, templates for AI, we don't really want AI to be filling in a lot of free-form description. The exception is excerpt. So there are definitely metadata cases where we want an excerpt of the content that makes it easier for a human to review maybe the reading level of a content. And so excerpt would be something where we'd have the AI take a piece of a larger piece of content and make it available as a metadata field. But if you give the AI a free-form box, it generally gives you a reasonable looking description that is helpful for a person, but is very unhelpful for other AI agents. It just introduces keywords and cognates that may or may not be useful. So from a system perspective, a specification for a worked example might be defined as it has a problem, it has steps, it has solution, it requires at least two steps, may optionally include a hint, must not include assessment scoring, and requires accessibility labels. Now we have something that is describing the content in terms that the system can validate. We can sort it, filter it, discover it, reuse it, compile it based on those values. And when we provide those values directly to an AI, when we ask it to create or modify the question, we move from authoring to proposed changes. So instead of asking the AI to freely author something from scratch to fill in a gap that's been identified, we can increasingly ask it to make a proposed change within known structures. The architecture tells us what's being changed, why it's being changed, what specifications apply, and what validation rules need to pass. And then we can give to a person or a subject matter expert the review process of reviewing a controlled proposal. Now, this worked example that the AI provides, we know that it validates against specs. So the only thing the reviewer needs to do is choose accept, approve, adjust, or reject it. And it's a much more governable workflow than let me start from scratch and see whether or not this worked example is pedagogically useful. Let me see whether it actually meets the requirements. Let me see whether it has enough steps. Those have been informed by the system, validated by the AI output. We're talking about now, is this correct? Is it the thing that we want to give to our end users? So why does all of this produce better AI results? Uh, and back to my original thesis, it reduces what the AI has to guess. The more information that comes from our structure, specifications, taxonomy, validation, relationship rules, the less interpretation we're asking the model to perform independently. Then we're letting the AI do what the AI does very, very well, which is transformation of content from one form to another, transposition of content from one place to another, identification of this is and is not covered, recommendations of how to fill gaps using structures that are already available. So we can ask basically the agents then are going through and saying, are the standards met? Does the metadata field exist? Is the metadata value that's applied allowed for that field? Does it align with our portfolio or enterprise level taxonomy? Was it applied at the appropriate content level? We can introduce new judgment agents to make sure that the rules are being followed because the rules are defined and discoverable. So the goal is to shrink the part of the workflow that's probabilistic and to rely on our system to inform what the AI is doing. So the principle that I want to say is using architecture to constrain AI's decision space increases trust in what the system is, what the AI is outputting. It decreases token cost and AI usage because now the AI is able to target what am I doing and why am I doing it with what pieces of content. It allows us to understand the depth and breadth of our content so we can do a lot more analysis on, data lakes of legacy content. We're able to pull those things together. Um, and we're leveraging our agents to do their job and not to redo the job of the architecture and content management system that the content lives in. We have, or GT has a lot more information on actually implementing agents and how we've thought about agentic workflows and governance and human in the loop. And that's available in our agentic workflow webinar on YouTube. So um, I won't go into a bunch of those. I will pause here, Greg, if there are any questions, because the next step is to actually go into GTCMS and see how am I setting, or how is GT setting ourselves up to leverage our architecture for these kind of advantages.
Sure. Yeah, Rob, we've gotten just a couple questions. Maybe we'll do a couple questions now, pause for them, then do the demo. And if there are more questions come in, we can revisit the Q&A after the demo. That sound good?
Sure.
So let me see. So the first question that came in is, I think earlier when you mentioned MCP.
Mhm.
So if MCP means that these models can reach into our systems, what does it actually see and use when it does that? And how do we protect our IP?
That's a great question. And the answer is it depends on the endpoints that are provided. So an MCP is um, a language that allows API endpoints to be exposed to AI agents. Um, so, for theoretical example, an AI agent may be brought in and not have the delete capacity, may not have the edit capacity, may have a suggest capacity. Depending on your system and what APIs are available, those are the things that the agent can do. We've seen companies make the mistake of giving the AI agent too much. So that comes back to governance in your architecture, where because it had the delete capacity and it had an ambiguous set of instructions, whole databases have been irretrievably deleted by AI agents in the past. So the first protection is what are you having the AI, what are you allowing the AI to do? And when you allow them to do it, what governance are you putting on context around why would you do this? When would you do this? What are you looking at? So content that has metadata attached to it allows the agents to understand huge swaths of content and their purpose and relationships without having to go through all of the content. So in the example that I gave, your IP never or only touched the agent that was being pulled in when it had confusion. So that photosynthesis page example, when it wasn't sure whether this was actually being measured and it wanted to check, gain confidence that those particular objectives were being measured, at that point did it read subsets of the content. If that content was untagged and didn't have this metadata, we would have to feed the entire section into the model. The other thing about protecting IP is an extremely interesting topic and one that I'm not going to dive too deeply on because uh, I'm not a lawyer, one, and I don't want to give the wrong advice here. Um, but don't plug in any models that you're not confident about, and don't plug in any models that you're not confident about the way that the data that you transfer is going to be used. Would probably be the two guiding North Stars there. Just make sure that what you're plugging into your system is something that you're plugging in responsibly and something that will be able to deliver the results that you need.
Okay, Rob, thank you. And we had one other question that came in, and I'm not sure at what point this one came in, but the you mentioned legacy content needing its own plan. Do you have a framework for that, or does GT have a framework for that, for what that usually looks like?
Yeah, so legacy content and tagging, the framework is uh, let me take that another step back. Legacy content that is untagged needs to be tagged according to specification and analyzed according to the structure requirements of your currently created architecture. So if I have a lesson that was created 6 years ago and we've had a brand change and we have, et cetera, changes that have happened to the way that we create content after that, without it being in a content management system that maintains those things, uh, you have sort of an accumulation of content debt. Now it needs to be updated to the standard and the spec and tagged in these ways. For the example or the topic that we're talking about around metadata and AI operability, um, the path is we want to make sure that we're reviewing the content that has been tagged, but we don't have the time to review every piece of content that has been tagged. So the taxonomy, having its own set of metadata, increases the trust that we're able to bring in. For legacy content, it reduces the amount of review that is required. With that, one of the most important agents or processes to put in is if it's not a perfect match and it doesn't perfectly align with the rules as given, it should be flagged for review. Whether that review is a second, more specialized agent that we've created with additional requirements and context to go through and say, oh, this was flagged for inconsistency, but it's close enough, or this needs a human review. That gives us basically a report or dashboard to work from that allows our SMEs to go and deal with the edge cases, the outliers, and the content that is non-conforming in some way, which is a much more appropriate use of our resources. And AI is not so great with edge cases and outliers and conforming those into the breadth of a portfolio. Every set of legacy content will have its outliers, will have its things that need transformed, will have things that were created for a specific reason in a specific way or a specific type of audience that may or may not fit the standards as were created for the entire portfolio. So those exceptions can be accepted and brought in. They can be adjusted, they can be flagged, or they can simply, have a warning whenever you use this. Make sure that you're using it in this way. Rules applied to them. I don't know that that answered the question, but I think I did.
I think it did. Um, well, that's all the questions we have for now, Rob. So why don't we switch over to a demo? And if questions or as questions come in, we can toggle back over to take them after the demo.
So what I'm showing right now is GTCMS. I'm going to show a couple different ways we've set our CMS up for success in this. So I'm not going to show agents doing tasks. This is a headless CMS, so you plug in whatever agent you need and whatever processes you need so that those can happen. What I'm going to show instead is how those metadata values work. And one caveat here, in product development, we used to have sort of two schools of thought. We had front end and back end. And now with AI, we have sort of three access points. We have front end, back end, and the agentic endpoints that they're able to use. So we want to make sure that we're creating something that is useful both for our people and our AI agents that doesn't overcomplicate the system in and make it unusable. So what I'm showing right now is a demo workspace. I've got workspace metadata values. There's a lot of values that are in here. We've tried to make these as transparent as possible. So what does this apply to? It can apply to the project level. It can apply to the content within a project, or it can apply to media or questions. I don't have any question example here, but you can apply the metadata to those values. So Rob demo. I don't want to use free input because I just talked about the dangers of that. So let's say single choice or multiple choice or Boolean, let's say, or hierarchical multiple choice, which is where you can actually add whole standards. Because this is a headless CMS, these metadata values should align with your content metadata. It should align with your processes. So when you add those values in, or import them, or however we align those up, they should be something that is uh, governed and makes sense. So maybe I've got a Boolean value that applies to project and content, and for the sake of demo, I'll say media. It can be applied at any level. And so now I have my little Rob demo data point. If I activate it, it'll be applied to projects and something that I can search for and filter projects that include this or not. That's just a quality of life adjustment. So let's look at projects. So I've got my college algebra textbook example. There's metadata attached to each. And so, what I had said earlier, we want these to be useful for people. So, people don't need to see the metadata values every time that they look at content, but it needs to be discoverable. So, at the project level, I can come in and say, let's take a look at the Rob demo, and I'll say, Rob demo is true for this project, right? Now I've applied the metadata at the project level. Whenever that project moves anywhere, or the AI looks at this, they'll be able to see all of these metadata fields and that that's available. Within projects, there are levels of content. There's actual sections. So here at the section level, I've got information, standard information. I've also got my metadata values. So for this section, I can actually say with my, hierarchical math, let's say that I can apply a standard. Now that standard is discoverable. We mentioned that that is discoverable. And our AI agents, when they come in and apply this, they can see that no value is applied. They can see the metadata values available. They have the contextual instructions about how that metadata gets applied. And additionally, we'd want to tell them apply at the lowest pedagogical level. Might be this section level, might not be this section level. Maybe we want that at a page level instead. The section should have our learning objectives, for example, and we'll say that Rob demo here is false. So now I've applied section level metadata. I also have page level. So this introduction page, if I look at the metadata of this introduction page, it doesn't have learning objectives attached to it because it's not really fulfilling the learning objectives. But I do have this little vignette. And so this vignette has its own set of metadata attached to it. And so I can see what's the metadata for that vignette. And I have a generated description. So I have a little AI model or AI generated description of this. I don't have learning objectives because it's setting the framework for the question. It doesn't actually answer the question. It's not instructional. But I do have some way of identifying what this content is. And as we build out those metadata values and those specifications, more and more can be added to understand what is included here. So my focus questions, for example, can have focus questions specific block information. But when I get to an instructional page, see this instructional page has specific learning objectives, and I look at the metadata for that instructional page, I do expect to see the learning objectives included here because this page will cover those objectives or a subset of those objectives. So maybe I don't add all of them in, but in this case, I've only got 2 pages, so I'm going to add them all in. And I can go through and I see that block, that manifest of blocks that we had talked about. So already the system is able to say, I have this list, right? This translating phrases into expressions listing. It's on this page, it's in this section, it's in this project. It has its metadata. Everything above it has its own metadata. The AI agent can very quickly, without even reading this text, understand what it is, where it is, how it's used, in what order. After that, the metadata may or may not tell it enough, and so then it can read this particular set of content. Same with media. So I'll jump over to our media library and look at some of the metadata on media. So I've got a picture, one PNG, which is not a great title, right? So if I'm just scanning through and I pull this up, it's pedagogically unuseful. But we have the long text and description. So if I want to, I can have AI add some alt text here according to the standards that we've created, whether it's informative or decorative. All of these details are forms of metadata, but additionally, I can switch over to metadata and I've got the ability to define what is this use. So this is where it becomes useful for permissions, right? How are the rights managed? What product family was this used in? Rob demo true or false? Any categories that need to be put and included for this particular image. And that metadata follows that image wherever it gets used in any project. So I've got metadata at multiple levels, all interacting. Um, and we've set that user interface so that it's consistent. When you're on a metadata page, our users can see that same module and widget and sidebar. So they know this. I'm editing the metadata for these content blocks. That's useful for our people. The AI doesn't need that interface and it's not helpful for it. So in the actual structure beneath, all of those metadata values are actually attached to the block within the content structure. So anytime a backend agent looks at this block, it can see the block and the metadata at the same time. So it's able to pull that information very quickly. And if it's searching for things, it can search, here are the fields, look at those fields and skip past the rest because it's only extracting a named and known value. I want to pause there because that's what I had scoped out to make sure that we had talked about for these things. There are other metadata values. So if I, create a learning objective or questions, you've got the ability to add instructions, context, knowledge base information. So we can do things to add more context when we're in the CMS and our GT builder in order to create more pieces of these things. But that is sort of what I warned against in the theory. Adding too much context asks the agents to do too much. But when you're in the CMS as a user and you want to leverage AI, more context is useful. So if I go to my knowledge base, I can go to the source of this particular project. I can also add documentation because I'm not launching an agent here. I'm launching an individual process, which may, based on the model, spawn agents in the background, but I'm asking the AI to do something specific with specs that I'm giving it in real time to interact with my content. And so in those cases, more context is useful because it defines what is the objective that the user is asking for on the fly, rather than an automated, how do I go in and perform these tasks, which we would want more governance over. I'll pause there, or else I'll just keep demoing the platform
Yeah.
and diving deeper and deeper. But that is the central theory of how to leverage your architecture to make AI more useful in content publishing, narrow the scope of what it is that it's looking for, and define what it is that you want it to provide with what parameters, sort of at every level, sets you up so that every output is more and more trusted and you have less and less revision time, so you're not introducing new content and metadata debt and AI debt by plugging these models into your systems. So that's the architecture behind successful implementation.
And Rob, we have not gotten any new questions, but I'll ask a question. Just uh, that I've heard you ask before, actually. So if someone is watching this and wants to start tomorrow, um, putting theory into practice, where should they begin? Like, where do they start?
Yeah. Um, the important pieces, if you're going to start tomorrow, is defining your content structures, defining your metadata layer, and planning a process layer. So, um, tagging content according to metadata values that you have used in the past is useful. But are those metadata values things that you want to leverage in the future, right? Are they for discoverability because you had a system that was opaque to users and without those metadata values, you couldn't effectively filter and find? An AI agent can effectively filter and find for you. So eventually, if you've got a chatbot in your whatever system you're using, do you need those metadata values in their current form? Are they standardized across your entire portfolio, or are they siloed according to production units? And will you ever want AI to operate across all of your production units at the same time, or create reports on metadata adherence? If so, defining those sort of business objectives first lets you then make the decisions about, okay, content metadata. How do I fix my vocabulary to make sure that it all fits? How do I block out my taxonomy so that I know what's used where? How do I understand provenance and what's important in our provenance, right? Is it that humans did it, or is it that this particular team in production did it, or that this particular team in editorial had done that, right? What level of trustability comes in, right? If QA says this applies to this, is that sufficient? Is that not sufficient based on your team's processes and scope? Future-facing specifications is sort of that second step. So now that you've defined what it is that you want to exist and how you want it to exist, we can go through the legacy content and find the gaps. But new content, how do you want new content to appear? So I mentioned briefly and didn't show any examples of creating items to specification. And Greg, I think you've got some webinars on YouTube that talk about our builder and templates and how we're building specification for new content. That process of standardizing what goes where um, shifts your production teams from bespoke work where I put in a heading and then I put in text and then I put in a box and then I put in tables to we always put in these things so we can templatize those things so that when we start with AI filling in from whatever source we're using or whatever manuscript we're using or whatever idea we have. It's filling in the structures that we already trust in the pedagogical format or in the pedagogical format and presentation that's already useful. So we don't have to spend time going back. One of the most tedious things that I've seen across the board is you have an author, a trusted author, they author in Word, maybe they use templates and styles, maybe they don't. Somebody has to go and take that Word file and turn it into whatever your authoring system can use. Um, by setting up those specifications, you enable AI to transpose your unstructured word into those formats and identify the format gaps that are available, suggesting perhaps, the images and placeholder, et cetera. You're able to take that load off of a person so that your person's job is, did we conform to the vision of the author, using our structure, or is there something that's more unique here that we need to make a custom adjustment for? All of that has to be defined and planned and thought through before we get to a process layer. Because if we start building the process too early, we'll build it onto what we have now and not where we want to go. Long, long way to answer what to do.
I thought that's a good answer. I don't see any more questions coming in, so I think we can wrap up. Um, I hope it was useful for everybody to see the theory and the demo side by side. I hope that Rob's overall thesis about scoping has come together for you. When AI is pointed at an entire title with nothing to orient it, it has no choice but to work broadly. And that's where you get the guessing and the misses and the correction passes that your teams end up doing. It all comes from that. But component level tagging and metadata narrow what the model has to look at. And the accuracy you saw today is a direct result of that narrowing. So Rob just pulled up our contact info. You'll should get an email within the next day or so with a link to the full recording if you want to share it with any colleagues who weren't able to attend today. And if there's anything from today that sparked questions about GT or about how structured content and AI can work together for you, please reach out. We'd love to set up a call or and a demo to tell you a little bit more about GT and the kinds of consulting work we can do. Um, so thank you so much for attending today, and take care. And I hope you enjoy the last week or two of the summer. Have a great day.
Thank you.